Welcome back to Beyond the Call. We're continuing with part two of our conversation with Captain Matt Frost, retired. So make sure that you've listened to part one, and this is a continuation. If you've got any feedback, let me know. beyondthecallpeter@gmail.com. On we go with the chat.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so
What about, was there much physicality in the training as far as like physical fitness, that type of thing? Or,
not a lot. We were expected to maintain our own fitness by that point, and there was a gym on base. I actually did get quite ripped during that time. I was putting a lot of effort into my physical fitness. I was training a couple of times a day, gym, cardio, and that certainly helped. I guess I'd always been fit and enjoyed, physical challenges. I'd done outrigger canoeing and water skiing, during my teenage years. I'd gone to the gym and all of that kind of stuff. So uh, having having extra time to do that was really great.
yeah.
And we did do group PT sessions, which were pretty miserable. I'm sure you've been through those. Some dude screaming at you to do a sit up with 100 other people holding a rope or running at the same pace as some slow person. It's just an absolutely brutal way to bond a group. But yeah, I just did it and it was fine, I guess. It
Yeah.
was not something I looked forward to, but it's just part of it. Yeah.
So we're in 2003. So obviously September 11's happened, 2001. So we're, we're basically getting involved in Iraq at that stage.
Yeah.
What's the sort of, what's the, were we actually over, were we involved by the time you went through?
Yeah. So I remember on flight screening, the one of the challenges during our officer selection board, that final sort of 2 day interview that we had was to do a speech, write an essay, and do a group discussion on a particular topic. And we had all chosen to do the invasion of Iraq because it was on the TV that week. Like that was during the early months of 2003, and
Yeah.
um, that was the hot topic at the time. And the officer selection board officers were like, "Actually, no, we want you to do it on drugs in sport. The invasion of Iraq is too political. We don't want you to talk about that." And we couldn't believe it. We're like, we're joining the defense force. We're probably going to be involved. Like that's why we're here. You don't want us to talk about it. It really blew our mind. We're like, how do
That's
you
ironic,
guys?
isn't it? That's very
Yeah, we're like,
ironic.
yeah. So we had to. I think it was because it was such a polarizing argument, and we had to have people who were on the opposite side. I guess they didn't want us arguing the negative. We should be,
Yes.
invading Iraq, perhaps. Maybe that would undo morale at some point. I don't really know their logic there. But yeah, we ended up arguing about something else instead. But that was definitely something we were aware of when we were going through. And there were guys who had previously served in other corps. There was a signals officer. She was already a captain on my course. There was a guy who was an infantryman. There was a bunch of other officers there who had spent time in other corps doing the work, and they knew guys who were deploying, and they were giving us, the down low on what was happening on the ground for a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff, which is very interesting and gave us. Look, I don't know whether it helped or anything, but it certainly gave us a focus. If we wanted to focus on something, I was like, hey, if we do good here, we could help these guys. Um, and that I don't remember being particularly motivated by that at the time. I just knew that there was this challenge in front of me, and I was not going to be defeated by it. But I was also acutely aware of what was happening, and we were following, the tactics. And by that time, I knew that I was in the helicopter, attack helicopter stream, and that I would be flying helicopters in warlike conditions like that at some stage. So I was tracking that. I was looking at air defense weapons that were being used and that type of thing, and just I guess reading all of that material with an interest. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there any, was there any fear at any stage, like shit's getting real?
Not really. We're still pretty far from being frontline. Uh, there was a healthy separation. We were still basically cadets. We still were flying with instructors every day.
Yeah.
Every now and then we get a solo sortie, or we'd fly with another a classmate, and but we didn't really have a lot of wiggle room with what we could and couldn't do in the aircraft by that stage, and we were bound by what was in our training manuals. So we couldn't really go out and pretend that we were attacking ground targets in an aerobatic CT4 without getting busted, and that
Yeah.
would go against you. So if anything, it gave you the focus that we just need to get through this.
Yeah.
Just do the right thing, and you'll get through, and then you can help. You can't pretend, you can't do anything now. Let's just crack on and get past this exam. So
Yeah. You can't run before you walk.
yeah, that's right. So out of the four really hard flying exams, I barely scraped by. I was a terrible test taker, but I was good enough in my normal sorties. I was regularly scoring above average. I put a lot of effort into my preparation, and I knew, thankfully, my memory was pretty good, so I used to be able to recall things quite quickly, and I could adapt quite quickly in the cockpit, which was very useful. But yeah, as far as tests go, man, I had test anxiety, something terrible, and I was just scraping by my tests. And a lot of people didn't. A lot of people would fail. Certainly, the instrument flying was really, really challenging because the rule book is super thick, and you have to know them. And if you forget one, that's it. It's a safety violation, and you're out. So
Yeah.
a lot of guys stumbled at those hurdles. And then it was, let me think, I graduated that by Anzac Day 2004. I was in the flyby party that flew by a lot of the Anzac ceremonies. And that was kind of
Yeah.
like one of my last flights out of Tamworth before going to helicopter school. And my helicopter training started June 2004 at Oakey, which is just inland from Toowoomba in Queensland.
Yep. Yep. Do you remember your first solo flight?
Uh, my first solo flight. I do actually, yes. Terrifying moment when I realized they'd let me loose in this thing all by myself. It was at one of the
Yeah.
satellite airfields, and I was there with a bunch of my mates. My course mates were all having solo day kind of on the same day, and it was much much high fiving after, and sort of gentle ribbing. Hey, you left your flaps down, dickhead. And it was like,
Yeah, picking
and it
everyone,
was,
each other to pieces.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically. And our instructors are, standing there like proud fathers, having having passed on their knowledge, and they were just happy that we'd be back alive. I do remember my first night flight. It's called Pins flight because after you fly an aircraft both night and day solo, you get a pin for that aircraft to say that you are qualified on that aircraft, basically. And that was something you
Yeah.
would tuck away inside your dress uniform, inside the cuff or the lapel, sorry. So you could flash your pins at those people who, you know, didn't have them or did have them,
Yeah.
and
The
someone flashed the
comparison.
pins. Yeah, someone flashed the pins and you didn't have yours and you owed a drink, or this is some nonsense, just esprit de corps basically. But
Yeah.
yeah, on my pins flight, I remember turning base, and it was a dark night at Tamworth. The runway was, your helmet's on fire basically. You're scrambling just to hang onto the tail of the aircraft by that stage because you just shit, I'm at night solo. I've got to remember all of these rules. I've got to remember how to fly this thing. Hope God, landing. Oh my God, yeah. And you can kind of get run away with yourself if you're not careful. But I remember turning base, and then I remember my friend coming on the radio like, why are you coming straight at me? And yeah, it turns out I'd misidentified a plane as a star or something and started to turn inside their aircraft, and we were on a collision course for a short time. So that's certainly burned into my memory. But again, we survived. So we must have done
Yeah.
something right. Yeah.
What do I say? You learn more from your mistakes.
Yeah, that's right. It's because when you ask me about my solo flight, that's the first thing that I remember. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
burned in there, all right. Yeah.
And when how many hours does it take of like in flight, or how many flying hours does it take to be qualified to sort of be out and about?
So fixed wing, we did. I think my logbook's about 120 hours. I think it was somewhere between 113 to 125 or something was the generally accepted time, and then that included things like extra flights. If you failed a flight, you could retrain and you could do that flight again. You could do a
Yeah.
remedial and do it again. If your test went long or you failed a test, you would then retest. So they allowed a few extra hours here and there to give people some wiggle room. I did about 120. That was, I thought, more than adequate. It was an aerobatic aircraft. But we didn't have to do a lot of aerobatics because we were heading towards a helicopter. And if
Yep.
you don't know, helicopters should not be doing aerobatics, or are generally not a great thing to do in a helicopter.
I've seen Airwolf, they do it.
Yeah, that's right. Look, you can do flips in helicopters, sure, but you probably shouldn't because there's really no tactical advantage. So we did basic stuff, but a lot of our time airborne was spent doing navigation. Low level navigation was that was what we were going to be doing in helicopters pretty much every single flight. So
Yeah.
they spent a lot of time really drilling us. We would be looking for individual fence posts. We'd be looking for windmills. We'd be looking for a tiny little water hole at the end of a creek. They were our turning points. We were right down in the weeds as far as navigation went, and we were expected to be able to identify and use maps right down to basically the full depth of maps. So if an infantryman gave us his map, we should be expected to navigate off that just as well as we could have
Yep.
off an aviation map. So that skill, thankfully, was one that came quite easy to me. I was always at home reading that, and I can't remember screwing my navigations up too bad at all. I was always felt pretty comfortable doing that stuff, so that was always
Yep.
good. Yeah, and that was a skill that paid off much later as well. I didn't have to try quite so hard for the map reading, so therefore I could concentrate later on things like tactics and contingency plans and radios and that kind of stuff. The other stuff that could catch you up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you so in retrospect, did you enjoy fixed wing? Do you prefer helicopters? Obviously, you went to the helicopter because that's where you were selected, but
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed my time, but I was very acutely aware that I was being tested the entire time, which I did not enjoy.
yeah.
And some of the course material was aimed at seeing if we could handle pressure. So that would deliberately make things more difficult than they perhaps should be.
Yep.
Not necessarily to let's try to totally screw this guy, but they definitely weren't being helpful. So we would on a long range navigation, for instance, we'd hand over the controls to the instructor, and he'd be acting as a, in inverted commas, competent co-pilot. And your competent co-pilot would vary from holding the wrong speed, the wrong heading. He would waver on altitude and slowly climb or descend. And it was up to you
Yep.
to pick that stuff up and direct him appropriately, like you would as an aircraft captain. So
Yep.
yeah, there was many times where you'd be, if you didn't have a good work cycle or a good, navigation sort of instinct, you could be, miles off course or at the wrong speed or, more than 10 minutes late for a time on target because you hadn't been keeping a tight eye on your competent co-pilot. And
Yep.
that would bring a lot of people unstuck. So once you knew that trick, though, once you knew that they were kind of out, again, he's out to get you, but once you knew that they were going to challenge you in that way, it was a lot easier. You could just
Yep.
adapt to your work cycle to make sure that he wasn't being a dick to you. And then
Yep.
after the third correction, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, no worries. I see what I was doing wrong now," and then he'd just fly normally. So
Yep.
he knew that trick wasn't going to work, so he'd just fly like a proper dude then, which was kind of
Yep.
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right. And do you remember the first time you used weapons on the in a helicopter?
First time I shot something. Yeah, this is years later now. So we didn't train on weapons until we got to the regiment. Because we're jumping forward quite a few years now. Let me think. So I finished my helicopter training in 2005 and went to Darwin, and I was allocated to 161 Reconnaissance Squadron as a reconnaissance pilot. And that was where all the good pilots were going at the time. But that was where you wanted
Okay.
to be. That was the pointy end of the aviation spectrum, I guess. And we knew that we were in line to become a Tiger pilot, an armed reconnaissance helicopter pilot, which was the latest and greatest helicopter. And
Okay.
um, when we got to when we were introducing that aircraft, there were only, let me think, I was on the second course to fly that aircraft as from the regiment. So there was 6 pilots already qualified, plus a couple of instructors. Um, and then we were the second group of 5 or 6, including the CO that we were about to have. The CO was on my course. And so by the time I got to the regiment, there was only like 8, 9 of us total.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
we'll,
so I didn't realize how it all works. So
yeah.
how many vehicles are you or aircraft are you qualified to fly then?
So CT4B, which is the trainer, the fixed wing trainer, um, and then I flew the Jet Ranger, the B206B. It's a Bell, basically two-bladed single-engine helicopter. Looks like your Channel 7 news chopper, painted green. Much older
Yep.
tech in it. So everything was steam-driven, or what we used to call steam-driven back in the day. There was no, shiny video screens. It was just all analog um, dials. There was a ye olde compass that was that used to take your headings from, that type of thing. It had the necessary instruments to fly instrument rated flights, but nothing. It was really old school. So
It
I
was a
flew
machine you were flying rather than it was flying
you.
itself.
Yeah, you had to be. Yeah, you were definitely flying it. You definitely had to know your way around it. There was nothing that was going to come up flashing red if you got something wrong. You had to look at the gauge. You had to read the gauge and then work out whether you were over the limit or not. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed flying that. It was fantastic. And on top of that, because it was so cheap to run and there was so many of them, the threshold for what was considered a sortie was quite low. So you didn't
Yeah.
have to necessarily go and learn something from every flight. You could go and just actually fly and just get hours in the airframe and develop a real feel for the machine, which is really, really great.
Yeah.
Later when we started flying the Tiger, it became very regimented, very strict. There was so few hours, you really had to make them count, which means if you weren't doing something purposeful, you weren't really going to get approval to go and do it.
Yeah.
Which there is definitely merit in that, but it also took a lot of the fun away. Whereas
Yeah.
when we're flying the Jet Ranger, we could just go out and be like, hey, I want an authorization for not below 10 feet. So we would just go and fly at 10 feet all over the entire training area and zoom in amongst trees, and we have to climb up over fence lines and things like that. Like, it was just incredible stuff. Flying that low, like, we're acutely aware that when you're at 30 degrees, 30 degrees angle of bank, your rotor blades were at the same level you were sitting. So if you wanted to tilt the aircraft any more than that, you had to climb. Otherwise, your rotor blades would be starting to go below you, and
Yeah.
that's a that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to go and fly as essentially just hide and seek. We go out with three or four aircraft, and we just go and hide from each other and see if we could find the other aircraft before they found us. And we had the
Yeah.
Mark One eyeball, and we had a pair of stabilized binoculars, and that was it. We had to the only way to win was by giving a really accurate grid for where they were. So we'd have to use all of our skill set to find them, and then to locate them on a map, and then radio before they could see us. So
Find you. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was
That's great.
really, really fun. Yeah, it's really that was a time I really remember fondly. It was just pure flying, and all of those skills developed in ways that it was hard to appreciate at the time, but certainly came back to us later in our careers.
Yeah. So yeah, because I would have thought, again, just being a layman and not been involved in the defense forces, that the the attack helicopters would be ones that you want to, you know, become one with kind of thing. They're the ones that you would put the hours in because they're the ones that you're more likely to be under fire and have to do things without thinking.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. That the ARH replaced the Bell 206 as the frontline reconnaissance helicopter, and it also added the capability of being armed. So it became the attack helicopter as well. So that was a capability that we had lost with the loss of the Huey. The Huey wasn't necessarily a reconnaissance helicopter, but it was a fires platform. There was rockets and gun available to be put on the Huey. You think
Yeah.
Vietnam days, that was the same tech that they were using, and that was phased out when I was going through my basic flight training. So the last flight of the Huey gunship was around 2004, I think.
Yeah.
And then the Tiger was accepted into Australian service in 2000 and gosh, I don't know, 2000. I want to say 2005. I think it was at the school at the time, but it didn't reach frontline regiment by First Aviation Regiment where I was based until 2009. It took a long time in development. There was lots of bugs to work out. And during that time, I was flying Kiowa the whole time, the Jet Ranger, and
Yeah.
developing my skills as a reconnaissance pilot, as an aircraft captain, instrument flying, And it was during that time that we went to deployed to East Timor as well in support of Opus, which is the peace and stabilization operation over in East Timor.
Yep.
Yeah, so we had I can't remember how many aircraft we had. We had maybe 30 aircraft in the regiment. We had maybe 30 pilots or so. So the aircraft and the pilots would rotate. We would split up into several different troops or teams of 5 or 6 pilots and a troop commander, and we could self-deploy. We'd go on an exercise. We were encouraged to go and develop our flying skills in different aviation environments. So, as an example, 4 helicopters and 8 guys would deploy to Toowoomba, and we'd spend a week flying around Brisbane in the
Yep.
congested airspace, doing navigation in different areas, doing all that kind of stuff. And then we'd fly home, and that would be enough hours to keep everybody current and proficient, and we'd maybe learn a new skill, get some testing done on a new sequence or whatever it might be. And then we're also deploying all over Australia in support of exercises. So if 2CAV were getting ready to go to Iraq, for instance, they would request aviation support during their lead-up exercises. So we would go down to wherever they were training, Coltana probably, because that's very like a Middle East type training area, and we would support them with all of the things that they would like from aircraft support in their real-world environment. So we give them navigation tips on how to navigate a particularly difficult river crossing or where the enemy might be. We'd call in artillery. We do
trying to
all
make
of that
it as high fidelity as you can.
Yeah, basically add complexity, and then we would make that our own training as well.
Yes.
There's obviously plenty of opportunities to cross train in that environment. So we were doing that the whole time. So from 2005, when I first got to the regiment, right up until when I went to Tiger in 2009, these deployments exercises were happening regularly. And depending on where you were in your career, you could be a co-pilot or a captain or a night captain and do a lot of flying on NVGs. Yeah, it just depended what was required and what you required to advance your career and maintain proficiency.
What were egos like within the flight, within pilots?
Generally pretty good.
Yep.
When we went through the Helo school at Oki, the attitude of the school was much more helpful than basic flight training. That you felt the instructors were really on your team, like you'd passed some sort of some component of the good bloke test, and that they were on your side. They were there to help you. I remember one of my instructors pulling me aside and going, "Hey man, you're really shit at instrument flying. Come over to my place on the weekend. We'll have a beer. We'll talk about what's been bugging you or what your challenges are, and we'll give you some study, some focus areas for study," which was amazing, right? Just knowing that some guy was on your side was a big change, and it was exactly what I needed. It was like, actually, there's just this chapter. Once you learn this chapter, you'll be fine. And sure enough, I was. So, but yeah, by the time you got to first aviation regiment, by the frontline regiment, you had passed several good bloke tests. So egos were generally checked pretty well. There were a few olds and bolds, those guys who'd been around long enough that perhaps they'd gone through a different system, who thought their shit didn't stink. But there were enough of us to keep them honest as well. If they tried to pull some shit in a debrief or after a large, group formation flight, we'd be like, "That's not what happened, mate. You can sit down. Yeah, like this is not about you. We're just trying to make each other better." So it was pretty widely accepted that debriefs were for safety points, for development of SOPs to make the whole system work better, and nothing was a personal attack. And if you took it as a personal attack, one, that was on you. Maybe we'd hit a sore point and maybe you needed to work on that. Or if someone did call you out on perhaps a skill or a procedure that you had lapsed, again, that was on you. Work on it, get better, come back and fix it next time. So I'm trying to think, and there was more. I was not a very good officer back then, man. I freely admit, looking back at my time as a lieutenant, I was an absolute shit fight, and I'm sorry to those people who had to put up with me back then. It took me a long time. All of those years as a socially awkward teenager were back. I was like a socially awkward, officer who just didn't know how to take a hint or take feedback very well. I felt under pressure and I couldn't figure out why. And it felt like I could always I was always disappointing my commanding officer, and I could never really figure him out either. It was a bit of a challenging time. And then, yeah, all of a sudden it started making sense, and all of a sudden I had an OC, a squadron commander, who I guess saw my potential in a good way this time, rather than
Yeah.
a grumpy maths teacher, and gave me more responsibility, and I rose to the occasion. And by that was 2007, 2008. I felt like I was good enough. Like I felt like I'd earned my place. By then I was a mentor and a check captain. I was assessing other pilots and their skills, and helping them
Okay.
maintain their currency. And I was teaching people reconnaissance skills as well. So we'd go out and we'd learn how to find things together.
Yep.
I'd be teaching new guys, how to track tanks and cavalry through the bush, and what to look for in order to find infantry that were dismounted. And there's a bunch of little hints and tips that you can use when you're flying around to do that. And that was a really, really fun, quite satisfying time. The later years in flying Kiowa was one of the happiest times in my career. That was,
Yep.
yeah, 0708. And right just before we were due to expect Tiger, I got selected. I went to Germany to fly the EC-135 over with the German Army as part of a lead-in training sort of program to get us used to, I guess, the modern technology of the new helicopter. It had, an all-glass cockpit. It had up-to-date avionics. It had all of these amazing moving maps and things that we'd never been exposed to. So
Yep.
the Australian Army were like, "Ooh," our pilots are all used to, steam-driven, gauges and dials, and fly with the doors off. And here's this air-conditioned cockpit with glass everywhere. We should probably do something to help them adapt.
Yep.
So yeah, we got selected to go to Germany. We flew with the German Army for a couple of months over there, and that was just an amazing trip, because we didn't really have to gain a qualification. All we had to do was sit in the cockpit and kind of just be exposed to this stuff. There was no formal learning. There was no certificates. There was no
Just
pass
absorption.
mark. Yeah, so there was plenty of times where the weather was going to be bad for a few days. We'd already kind of learned what we needed to learn that particular week, and then our German instructors were like, "So the weather's going to be bad for a couple of days. Maybe see you on Tuesday." And I'd look at my mate. We'd be like, "Dude, it's Wednesday." He's like, "Yeah, so just have a long weekend." So we would get we would get in the hire car, and we'd disappear and reappear on Tuesday the following week. And we went to Prague and Hamburg and Amsterdam, and just basically just had an absolutely amazing
That's
time in
great.
Europe, which was yeah, it was certainly one of the best army trips I've ever been on. Yeah.
That's cool. Um, okay, so how did it feel? So your first deployment was to East Timor, as you said. How did that go?
Um, Look, it was really good. I've got positive memories of that. That was in 2006. So it was a peace enforcement and stabilization operation was the formal title that we were given.
Yep.
Um, it was a bit of an on the bus, off the bus, back on the bus type stop, start, and start to it. We were planning to go as the second rotation. So if you're not aware, they'll send a troop, 8 guys, and the commander, maybe an extra pilot here or there. They'll send 3 or 4 aircraft in the back of a Hercules, I think it was at the time. And then those guys were planning to come back. Sorry, they're planning to stay there, and then we were planning to relieve them in place. We were going to fly over like 3 months later, and then 4 months
Yep.
rolled around, and we hadn't been told to go, and they had packed up their aircraft and all of their stuff, and they were at the airport ready to come home. And then a directive came down and went, "Actually, no, we need you to we need you to stay. We need the aircraft to stay there. Pilots will change." So it was really confusing about what was happening. But basically, we were told several times that we were going and then not going. Anyway, we ended up turning up, and the first rotation that I was on was the 2006. That was 3 months, and uh, East Timor is a helicopter playground. If you
Yep.
want, if you want perfect flying conditions for, I guess, challenging flying, it was absolutely unbeatable, just fantastic. The island itself is long and quite narrow. It's got an amazing mountain range right up to 10,000 feet.
Yep.
It's got tropical weather. It's got a mix of environments: coastal, flatlands, wetlands, jungle, arid, mountainous areas, and there's very little cultural development. So there's no skyscrapers, there's no massive power lines, which helicopters are absolutely terrified of. Uh, like there's maybe two or three radio masts in the whole island.
Yep.
So as far as helicopter flying goes, you just can't beat it. There's nothing you can't do there in a helicopter. It was just fantastic. So we went over and we had a general work sort of program. We had to navigate to and then photograph all of the infrastructure on the island. That was one of
Okay.
our I guess, continuous tasks. And because there were so many people, so many different countries providing aid to the country, there was always projects being developed. There was new radio masts going up all the time. There was generator installations. There was roads and bridges being constructed by different countries for different
Yep.
programs. So we were always updating a portfolio of that kind of stuff. And then we would get regular work, like reconnaissance, genuine reconnaissance work for the different ground units that were there. Would
Yep.
have an operation to go and storm or secure or capture a guy or a compound or a building or a piece of land or whatever it may be. We would go and do reconnaissance on that and give them all of their intel that they needed, roads leading to and from, the type of terrain, yeah, the type
Yep.
of building that they were likely to expect there. So we would take our camera equipment and record that, a video, stills, long range photography, that type of thing. And then there was ad hoc tasking. So we would generally rotate a crew to be ready to go at any particular time, morning, afternoon, and night shift. And that would be in response to civil unrest,
Yep.
riots. We would have regular incursions of gangs coming in from rival areas to stir up
Yep.
trouble. And this was all, politically motivated, as it turns out. We were getting pretty regular, decent intel briefs on the political situation in the country, which was incredibly complex for such a small
Yeah.
country. The
Yeah.
number of different groups that had an interest in Timor-Leste and the way that manifested on the ground was mind-blowing. We were most of our intel briefs were like, I'm sorry, what is happening? Like, you can't be serious. So we would go out and we'd have to identify, a particular group, and that was usually pretty easy because they were crazy, waving their flag or, chanting something. So we'd record it if we could and try to get the sound quality or zoom in on what kind of shirt that they were wearing with their logo or whatever, and
Yeah.
then
Right.
get that intel to the local people. And then there was quite a few times where we would intercept convoys of people coming in to start a riot or join a gang
Yep.
or whatever.
So
Uh,
training versus real world. Did it match?
a lot of the skills were instantly transferable for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
It was definitely it was different than we hadn't really tried to do any to train in a city and track vehicles was really, really difficult in Australia. People get annoyed with that stuff really, really
Yep.
fast. And if they've got a helicopter regularly flying over their home or playing hide and seek with their, with their
we
car,
we pretty much have that every day now here in Townsville, don't we?
yeah, basically, it's people find that quite annoying. So we would have to be, I guess, judicious with the way we do that in the real world, back in the training. But over there, it was fantastic, and you could. There was one time I remember in particular, there was been a report of violence in a little village that wasn't far away from Dili, um, where some people had been injured by a gang, with machetes. It was pretty awful, really.
Yep.
And we were called to respond to that because we had to basically go there and wait until ground forces arrived in order to secure the area. So we just stayed
Yep.
overhead. I think we flew, like we worked out that the best speed to fly was like 43 knots, which is the most efficient flight, speed for our aircraft on that day. And we were there for 3 hours doing circles over this village. And to make a jet ranger fly 3 hours is pretty amazing. Like they're not meant to fly for that long without a refuel.
Okay.
But we knew that as soon as we went, then the violence would restart. So
Yeah. You were the circuit breaker.
basically, yeah, and we could see the guys waiting on the outskirts. They were waiting a couple hundred meters away from this village, standing there with machetes, basically tapping their machetes, waiting for us to go before they
Yeah.
stormed into this village to do damage. It was Yeah, we actually developed a kind of a weird tactic to, I guess, assess the mentality of a group like that. We would go past really low and slow and just give them a wave. And if they were friendly, they would, most of the time, everybody was friendly to a helicopter. You see a helicopter, you wave, right? Well, these guys weren't waving, and they were looking at us with this grim look on their face. And you could take we were using like a D200 camera back then with a zoom, a 300 millimeter zoom lens on it, so you could actually
Yep.
zoom in pretty good. And we'd put it on rapid fire and just shoot the crowd with the camera, and then you could
Yep.
go through and use the little screen to have a look. And these guys were ready to do violence. So we were giving regular radio reports, and we could hear the infantry guys coming up the range in their Land Rovers. And we're like, man, this is going to be so tight. Like these guys are only barely going to get here by the time we have to go. What are we
Yeah.
going to do? Like, do we land and get our pistols out to stop these guys? Like what? How do we do this? And
Yep.
anyway, as it turns out, it worked out fine. But it was one of the few times where I remember genuinely making a difference. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. All right, folks, we're going to wrap up part two of our conversation with Matt Frost, and make sure you tune in for part three.